Steph and Ayesha, a love story, written by Barron, narrated by Jessica Ann Bogart. If you found this book because you already know them, because you have watched 4 NBA championships, 2 MVP seasons, an Olympic gold medal, and the cultural rise of one of the most watched young families in modern American sports, welcome. You will find what you came for. The youth group at Central Church of God in Charlotte is here. The Facebook message in 2008 is here. The first kiss in the driveway of her parents' house is here. The proposal in the same driveway is here. The wedding on July 30th, 2011 is here. The first dance to Lucky is here. Riley is here. Ryan is here. Cannon is here. Caius is here. The vow renewal officiated by their oldest daughter is here. The brand called Sweet July is here. If you found this book and you have not, in any deep way, followed basketball or food television or any of the small public corners these two people have, in 15 years of marriage, made a home in, welcome to you too, and stay. The question this book is answering is one you already care about, whether or not you know who Stephen Curry is when he is shooting from 28 feet. Can a 14-year-old Canadian girl sitting in a church youth group in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2003, and the 15-year-old skinny boy on the other side of that youth group whose father has been a professional basketball player and whose own basketball future is, at 14, not yet certain? Can the two of them, 5 years later, after she has gone west to LA to be an actress, and he has gone north to Davidson to play college basketball, find each other again on Facebook and build, in the years that follow, a marriage and a family that has, by every reasonable measure, been one of the most watched young black families in American public life? The book you are holding is inspired by publicly available material about Ayesha Disa, Alexander Curry, and Wardell Stephen Curry II. The exterior, the timeline, the on-record interviews, the joint magazine profiles, the cookbook tour interviews, the Sweet July magazine launches, the Bay Area restaurant openings, the Olympic gold in 2024, the Curry Center for the Performing Arts, the children's birthdays in July, and the youngest in May. The joint family social media is sourced. The interior, the Facebook message in 2008, the kitchen on the morning Ayesha got the news that she was pregnant with Riley, the locker room moment after Steph's first championship in 2015, the bedroom in their first house in Walnut Creek, the night they decided to grow the family one more time, is dramatized in the spirit of what they have said, in their own words, in their own books, on their own podcasts, on their own platforms, about their own marriage. No third party has been named or speculated about. Where the public record was silent, the narrative has been softened, omitted, or generalized. What follows is a love story, not a perfect one, not a televised one, the actual one, told the way they have always told it, friends first at 14, then nothing for 5 years, then everything for the next 2 decades. Prologue. Both of us. A house. An evening in 2026. There's a kitchen in a house in Atherton, California, that the two of them have been, in 15 years of marriage, slowly making theirs. The kitchen has the kind of windows that face a yard you can see most of from the breakfast table. The kitchen has, at the moment we are entering it, the smell of garlic, butter, and a particular roasted chicken rhythm that Ayesha has, since approximately 2009, been refining into the version of it that her cookbook readers, on certain afternoons, in their own kitchens, have been trying to replicate from her instructions. The kitchen has, at the moment we are entering it, 4 children. Riley, who is 14, is at the kitchen island with a homework book open in front of her, and a pencil in her hand, and a small private posture that, from the side, makes her look like a younger version of her own mother at 14. Ryan, who is 11, is on the floor by the dog with the dog's head in her lap, doing the small private thing she does when she has decided the homework she is supposed to be doing is going to wait. Cannon, who is 8, is at the far end of the kitchen counter on a stool, watching his mother chop, in the way of a small boy who has, in his 8 years, decided that his mother is the most interesting person in any room he is in. Caius, who is 2, is in the high chair, which is the high chair Ryan was in, and Cannon was in, and Riley was in before that, and which has, by now, the small private dignity of a piece of family furniture that has fed 4 children. Steph is at the kitchen counter on the other side of the island. He is in a t-shirt that one of the kids drew on in 2018 with a fabric pen, and that he refuses to retire. He is slicing limes. He is good at slicing limes. He has, in the way of a man who has, in 15 years of marriage, accepted that the kitchen is the wife's and that the husband is allowed to be useful at the perimeter, learned which knife is the right knife for which job. Ayesha is at the stove. She says, "Baby." Steph says, She says, "The rice." He says, "I got it." He moves to the stove. He stirs. The rice is fine. He stirs anyway, because he has learned in 15 years that when his wife says the rice, the correct response is not to argue with her about whether the rice in fact required attention. The correct response is to stir. He stirs. He goes back to the limes. Riley, at the island, looks up. She says, "Dad." He says, She says, "You're slicing those wrong." He laughs. Ayesha, at the stove, laughs. Ryan on the floor laughs. Cannon on the stool laughs because the rest of the family is laughing. Caius, in the high chair, slaps the tray with his hand, which is his way of joining the family laugh from the position of a 2-year-old who has not yet, in any meaningful way, figured out what they are laughing at. The dog laughs the way dogs laugh, which is to say, it sticks its tongue out and rests. Steph stops slicing. He looks up at his oldest daughter. He says, "All right, Riley, show me." Riley comes around the island. She takes the knife. She slices a lime. The lime falls apart in even 1/4-inch pieces, in the way a lime falls apart when a 14-year-old who has been raised in this kitchen by this woman, since she was old enough to sit on the same stool Cannon is now on, is the one slicing it. She hands the knife back. She says, "Like that." He says, "All right." She kisses the side of his face on the way back to her stool. That is the love story. That is the whole of it, in this kitchen, in one sentence, for the people who skip to the end. The rest of the book's how they got here. Part 1. Before. Chapter 1. Ayesha, Toronto, to Markham to Charlotte. I was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on March 23, 1989, to a couple named John and Carol Alexander, in the kind of household that, by any reasonable Canadian measure, should not have produced an American restaurateur and lifestyle brand founder, and which, by another reasonable measure, was the only kind of household that could have. My father is named John Alexander. My father is a Black American Polish man whose particular family ancestry is one of the small private complications I have, in the years since, learned to be specific about, because the specificity is the only honest way to describe a Canadian, Jamaican, Chinese, Polish American household raising 5 children in the suburbs of Toronto in the late 1980s and the 1990s. My mother is named Carol Alexander. My mother was Carol Chin before she became Carol Alexander, and her own family is Chinese Jamaican on one side and Afro-Jamaican on the other. My mother's hands in the kitchen were the hands of a Chinese Jamaican woman who had, by the time she was raising me, learned to make every dish her own mother had made, and her own grandmother had made, and her own grandmother's mother had made, in an island her own mother had left long before any of us in the kitchen had been born. I want you to picture the household. I want you to picture 5 children. I want you to picture 2 parents. I want you to picture, in one particular kitchen in Markham, Ontario, in the late 1990s, the smell of jerk chicken on a Saturday afternoon, with a soundtrack of Caribbean music my mother kept on a tape deck at the counter, and the particular Canadian summer light coming through the kitchen window, and the small, ordinary, unremarkable, holy fact of a child of 2, then 3, then 4, then 5 children who was, on those Saturday afternoons, learning by being in the room. I learned to cook by being in that room. I want to put that on the page first, because the rest of this book is going to involve a cookbook, several of them, that have been New York Times bestsellers, and a lifestyle brand named Sweet July, and a quarterly magazine, and a culinary television series, and a set of Bay Area restaurants, and the entire small public empire of food and home and lifestyle that I have, in 15 years of working at it, built. None of it came from culinary school. None of it came from a single chef I trained under. All of it came from the kitchen in Markham, with my mother at the stove, with the tape deck at the counter, with the 4 siblings rotating through the room, with the smell of jerk chicken on a Saturday afternoon. I had 4 siblings. I will tell you their names briefly, because my siblings are not, in any of their own lives, looking to be characters in another person's love story, and I want to give them the dignity of 1 paragraph and 1 paragraph only. They are Maria, Janice, Jazz, and Chad. They are, in 2026, the people who have known me longer than anyone except our parents, and who, on every Christmas of my life, have been around a table somewhere with a version of the food my mother taught me to cook, with their own children, with the rest of the family. We moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, when I was 14. I want you to read that on the page. I moved to Charlotte at 14. The move was a normal Alexander family move that the public record, in some quarters, has tried to make exotic. The move was not exotic. The move was the kind of move a working family makes when work moves. We moved from Markham to Charlotte. I started 9th grade at a Charlotte area school. I made friends. I went to church. The church was in Charlotte. The church had a youth group. The youth group is where I met him. I did not know, on the day I met him, that I had met him. I want to put that on the page also, because the public version of this story has, in some quarters, been told as if there had been thunder in the room when we met. There was no thunder. There was a 14-year-old me in a youth group with maybe 40 other kids on a Sunday evening in 2003 in a church in Charlotte called Central Church of God, And there was, on the other side of that youth group, a skinny 15-year-old boy I had been told was a basketball player, and whose name, before I had been introduced to him, I had only heard. The skinny boy was not, at 14 going on 15, the most physically commanding boy in the youth group. I was not, at 14, paying him much attention. I was, at 14, paying attention to a different boy in the same youth group, whose name I am not going to put in this book, because the boy in question is, in 2026, married with his own family, and the small private 14-year-old crush I had on him is not mine to put on a page in a book about a marriage I am, in fact, in. I want you to keep that in mind for the rest of this book. The man I would marry, the first time I met him, was the second most interesting boy in the room. I have, in the years since, joked about that fact with him many times. He has accepted the joke with a particular kind of small interior dignity that I have, in the years since, learned is one of the best things about him. He was, at 14, willing to be the second most interesting boy in the room and trust that the rest of his life would, eventually, sort the order out. It did. He was, by the time I was 19, the only boy in any room I was in. But that took 5 more years. The 5 years are the part of the book that comes after this chapter. Chapter 2. Steph, Charlotte. I was born in Akron, Ohio, on March 14th, 1988, to a man named Wardle Stephen Curry and a woman named Sonia Adams Curry, the older of 2 boys, in a household that was, by every reasonable measure, a basketball household before I was old enough to know what basketball was. My father was Del Curry. My father played in the NBA for 16 seasons. My father played for, among other teams, the Charlotte Hornets, which is why, when I was about 3 years old, my family moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, where my father became a beloved figure in the local Charlotte basketball community, and where I, in turn, was raised in a Charlotte that the rest of the country only knew from sports broadcasts. My mother was Sonia Curry. My mother is a black woman from Radford, Virginia, who, in her own right, played volleyball at Virginia Tech, and who, in our household, was the disciplinary architecture under everything my father's basketball career was building. My mother insisted in our household on 3 things in this order: God, school, family. Basketball was, in our household, the 4th thing. My father's job was the basketball. The mother's discipline was the first 3 things. I have, in the years since, been called many things on basketball courts and at basketball-adjacent press conferences. I have been called the best shooter to have ever lived. I have been called the man who changed the geometry of professional basketball. I have been called the unlikeliest superstar in the modern era because I am, by NBA standards, small, and I am, by NBA standards, slight, and I have, in the years since, become several of the things the NBA had not, in 2009, expected me to be. None of that is the chapter. The chapter is my mother. The chapter is my mother in the kitchen of our house in Charlotte on a Wednesday morning in 1999 or 2000, telling me, before I left for school, that no matter what happened with basketball, the woman who would eventually be the wife I came home to was going to be a woman my mother had to be able to look in the eye on the porch of our house and approve of. My mother said, eventually, you are going to bring a girl home. The girl is going to walk up the steps. I am going to be on the porch. I am going to look at her. I am going to know, by the way she walks up the steps, whether she is the one. You are going to know what I think before I say a single thing. She said, "Do not bring me a girl I cannot approve of." I had been raised as a result of that sentence on a particular Charlotte standard for the kind of girl I was going to bring home. I want to put on the page what the standard was. The standard was, the girl had to be a Christian. The standard was, the girl had to have been raised by a mother who was paying attention. The standard was, the girl had to have her own life, her own work, her own discipline, her own grown adult posture in a kitchen on a Sunday morning. The standard was, the girl had to make my own mother smile in some small interior way on the porch the first time she walked up the steps. I did not know, in 1999 or 2000, when the standard was first set, that the girl I was going to bring home for the first time several years later, in 2008, was a girl I had already met at 14, in a youth group, at the church on the other side of Charlotte where my own family had been quietly attending services for years. I had met her. I had not, at 15, recognized her. I had been, at 15, paying attention to the wrong piece of the room. I had been paying attention to the basketball court at my high school, which was, at 15, the only thing in my interior life that mattered. I had been paying attention to whether I was going to grow tall enough to have an actual NBA chance. I'd been paying attention to the small private question of whether I was going to be able to live up to my own father in the city my own father had been beloved in. I had not been paying attention to the Canadian girl in the back row of the youth group, who was, at the time, paying attention to a different boy. I want you to keep that in mind. The man you are about to read about in the next 23 chapters of this book was a 15-year-old who, on the night he met his future wife at a church in Charlotte in 2003, did not in any deep way notice her. The marriage came later. The marriage came after I had finished, in some quiet way, becoming the man my mother had been preparing me to become. Chapter 3. Ayesha, Moving to La. I want to do a brief chapter on what came next, because what came next was the part that, in any other love story, would have ended this one. What came next was Los Angeles. I moved to Los Angeles when I was 18. I moved to Los Angeles to be an actress. I want to put that on the page first, because the version of my life that has, in the public record, been told in the last 15 years has, in some quarters, skipped over the actress chapter, and the actress chapter is the chapter that, in some interior way, made the rest of my life possible. I was, between approximately ages 18 and 20, a working young actress in Los Angeles. I had agents, I had auditions, I had headshots. I had a small studio apartment in a part of Los Angeles I am not going to name in this book because the apartment is not the chapter. I had small roles in small projects. I had, at 12, before any of it, been in a music video for a song called Too Young for Love by an artist named Sugar Prince, which I have in the years since joked about often, because the song's title was, in some quiet way, the entire prologue of my own life as an actress. I was, by every honest measure available to me at 19, a working young actress. I was also, by every honest measure available to me at 19, lonely. I want you to read that on the page. I was lonely. I was 19 years old in Los Angeles, in a studio apartment, working a job that required me, on most days to be alone in a small room reading a script, and on most other days to be in a small room with a producer reading a different script. I had a small set of friends. I had a small set of habits. I had, on Sunday mornings, a small Los Angeles church I went to. I had on Tuesday evenings a small set of acting classes I took. I had on Friday nights a small set of dinners with girlfriends. What I did not have at 19 in Los Angeles was a person. I want to be specific about what I mean by a person. By a person, I mean the person who, on a Tuesday evening, after a long day, picks up the phone when I call. By a person, I mean the person who, on a Sunday morning, after church, is in the small private set of people who are, in some way, the people I am going home to. By a person, I mean the person who, on a Friday night, does not need to be told before I order what I am going to order, because the person already knows. I did not have that person. I had not had that person since I was 14. I had not, at 14, known that I had had that person for one Sunday evening in 2003 in a church in Charlotte. I had not known it because I had been paying attention at 14 to a different boy. I had not known it because the person had been, at 14 going on 15, the second most interesting boy in the room. I had, by 19, in Los Angeles, started to wonder, in the small interior way a 19-year-old in Los Angeles wonders, whether I had been wrong, at 14, about which boy in the room had been the right one. I was wrong, at 14, about which boy in the room had been the right one. I want you to read that on the page in italics, except that this manuscript does not use italics, so I will say it in plain language. I was wrong. I had been wrong. The wrongness was, by 19, the small private thing I had not yet figured out how to do anything about. Then, in the summer of 2008, I got a Facebook message. Chapter 4, Steph Davidson. I want to do a brief chapter on Davidson because Davidson is the part of my life that the public record has, in some quarters, skipped over, and Davidson is the chapter that, in some interior way, made the rest of my life possible. I went to Davidson College in Davidson, North Carolina, on a basketball scholarship in the fall of 2006. I want to be specific about what Davidson was, because most of the country, at the time I committed to Davidson, had not heard of Davidson. Davidson is a small liberal arts college with a basketball program that had, in 2006, not been, in any recent way, a major college basketball program. Davidson had been, before I got there, a small Division I program that had punched, on certain nights, above its weight. But that had not, in 20 years, made a deep run into the NCAA tournament. I went to Davidson because Davidson was the school that had, in the recruitment process, said yes to me. I want to put that on the page because the public version of this story has, in some quarters, made Davidson sound like a humble choice. Davidson was not, in 2006, a humble choice. Davidson was the only choice. The major program schools had, in the recruitment process, said no. They had said no because at 18 I weighed about 160 pounds. They had said no because at 18 I was about 6 feet tall and looked, by college basketball standards, fragile. They had said no because at 18 I had not yet, on the public record, become the player I was going to become. Davidson said yes. I went to Davidson. I will not use this chapter to recount the basketball. The basketball is on the public record. The basketball is in every documentary, every sports writer's column, every NBA front office briefing on the player I would, in 2009, become. The basketball, in 2008 in particular, became the year that Davidson, and with it, me, became a national story. The chapter I want to give you is the year I had been at Davidson before that story. I was a freshman. I had a small apartment off campus. I had a small set of friends. I had, on Sunday mornings, a small church I went to in Davidson. I had, on Tuesday evenings, a small set of basketball practices. I had, on Friday nights, a small set of dinners with the team. I had, on most Saturday afternoons, the small private question of whether I was, at 18, in fact going to grow into the player I had been telling myself I was going to grow into. What I did not have, at 18 going on 19 at Davidson, was the same thing Ayesha did not have at the same time in Los Angeles. I did not have the person. I want to be specific about what I mean. I had a small set of people who knew me. I had a small set of people who liked me. I had a small set of people who, on Sunday mornings, in the small church in Davidson, were happy to see me at the same pew week after week. I did not have the person. I had not had the person in any deep way in my entire 18 years. I had at 15 met a Canadian girl in a Charlotte youth group. I had not at 15 recognized her. I'd been paying attention to the wrong piece of the room. I'd been paying attention to my own basketball. I was, by the spring of 2008, paying attention to a different piece of the room. I want to be specific about how the change happened. The change happened at the end of an NCAA tournament run that the country had been, by the spring of 2008, paying serious attention to. The tournament run had been long. The tournament run had ended in the Elite Eight. The tournament run had, in the months that followed, made me a national name. I had been, after the tournament, on a small set of stages I had not, before the tournament, been on. I had been at the ESPYs in Los Angeles. I had been at small basketball-related events in cities I had not been to. I had been, in some quiet way, given the kind of public attention that, until that spring, had not been the version of attention my own family had been preparing me for. I had not, in the months of that attention, found a single person whose attention I wanted. In the early summer of 2008, on a small Tuesday afternoon, in my apartment near Davidson, I logged on to Facebook. I was not, that afternoon, planning to send a message. I sent the message anyway. The message was to a girl whose name I had been, in the back of my own internal accounting, holding for 5 years. The girl's name was Ayesha. Part 2, Reconnection. Chapter 5, Ayesha, the Facebook message. I want to tell you about the message. I was, on the day the message arrived, in my studio apartment in Los Angeles, in a t-shirt I had probably been wearing for 2 days, on a couch that had been left in the apartment by the previous tenant, in the kind of Tuesday afternoon Los Angeles light that does not commit. I had on my lap a laptop. The laptop was a 2007 Apple laptop. The laptop was open to Facebook, which at the time was a much smaller piece of the internet than it has, in the years since, become, and which, at the time, was the place where college students and recent college graduates kept track of one another's lives. I was checking my page. I want to put that on the page because the public record has, in some quarters, made the Facebook message sound like a destiny moment. It was not a destiny moment. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a t-shirt. I had not eaten lunch. I was, on the inside, the small interior version of myself that had not yet figured out what she was doing with her own life. A small notification appeared. The notification said, in the way Facebook notifications said things in 2008, that I had a new message. I clicked. The message said, "Hi, this is Stephen Curry. We knew each other a few years ago at the church in Charlotte. I am in LA next week for the ESPYs. Would you want to grab a meal?" I read the message. I read the message a second time. I read the message a third time. I want you to read what was happening in my body in those 3 reads. The first read, I was a young woman in Los Angeles trying to remember which Stephen Curry the message was from. I knew the name. I knew the face vaguely. I had by then, in 2008, started seeing the face on basketball broadcasts I was not, on most evenings, watching. Because I was not, on most evenings, the kind of woman who watched college basketball. The second read, I remembered the youth group in Charlotte in 2003. The third read, I remembered which boy in the room he had been. He had been the second most interesting boy in the room. I want you to read that on the page. He had been the second most interesting boy in the room. The first most interesting boy in the room had, in the 5 years since, become a young man whose face, by 2008, I had not, in any deep way, thought about for 2 years. The second most interesting boy in the room had, in the same 5 years, become the young man whose face was, on the laptop in front of me, in the Facebook message, asking me to a meal. I want to put on the page what I thought, on the couch, with the laptop. I thought, in the small interior way a Canadian, Jamaican, Chinese, Polish, American girl in a Los Angeles studio apartment in 2008 thinks about the moment a piece of her own past has, on a Tuesday afternoon, found her again. I had been wrong. At 14, the right boy in the room had been him. The wrongness had taken 5 years to sort itself out. The sorting, the message in the laptop suggested, was about to happen. I typed back. I want you to read the response I typed. I typed, "Hi, Stephen. Yes, I would love to. When are you in town?" The response was friendly. The response was brief. The response was, by every measure I have used in the years since, the most consequential message I have ever sent in my life. He sent back the date. The date was the next Wednesday. He gave a time. He gave a name of a restaurant. He gave the small set of pleasantries a young man at 20 gives a young woman at 19 when he is, in fact, more nervous than he is letting on, but is, by virtue of being a Curry, trained to keep the nerves off the page. I closed the laptop. I sat on the couch. I stared for a long time at the ceiling. I called my mother. I want you to keep that on the page. I called my mother. I called my mother because the women in my family, when something happens that the body does not know what to do with, call our mother. I called my mother in Charlotte. I told her about the message. I told her about the boy from the youth group. I told her about the dinner. She said, "On the phone, eventually, baby." I said, "Mama." She said, "I always liked that one." I said, "You remember him?" She said, "I remember him." She said, "The women in our family remember the right boys in the room. Even when the women in our family do not, at 14, know that they are remembering. The body remembers. The body has been holding him since 2003. She said, "Go to dinner." I went to dinner. Chapter 6, Steph, the ESPYs trip. I want to tell you about the dinner. I was 20 years old. I was in Los Angeles for a small set of events around the ESPYs. I had a hotel room I am not going to name in this book, because the hotel is not the chapter. I had a suit I had not yet worn for the events. I had a single Tuesday afternoon free before the event started, and I had, in my pocket, the small private knowledge that I had, 2 days earlier, sent a Facebook message to a girl I had not seen in 5 years. She had said yes. I had not, in the entire time between sending the message and receiving the yes, told a single person on earth that I had sent the message. I had not told my brother Seth. I had not told my mother. I had not told my father. I had not told my agent. I had not told the small set of friends I had at Davidson. I had not in any way performed the message. The message I had decided was mine. I want to put that on the page because the rest of this book is going to involve a marriage that has, by virtue of 2 public figure spouses, not always been able to keep its small private interior moments small. The first move I made toward my wife in the spring of 2008 was a private move. The marriage that followed has, on the inside, been, for 15 years, a marriage that has tried to keep that same posture. I went to the dinner. The dinner was at a restaurant in Los Angeles. I am not going to name in this book, because the restaurant is also one of the small private things we have kept. I will tell you only that it was, at the time, a quiet restaurant in a part of Los Angeles I had been to before, with a particular kind of warm interior light that the photographs from that night, if any photographs from that night had been taken, would not have done justice to. There were no photographs taken from that night, which I want you to read as a piece of the chapter. We did not, at the dinner, perform the dinner. She came in. I want to give you, on the page, the moment she came in, because the moment is the moment I want this chapter to end on. She came in. She was wearing a dress I am not going to describe in detail, because the dress is hers. She had her hair down. She had on a small set of earrings that I had not, in 5 years of holding her face in my mind, predicted she would have. She had on her face the version of her face that the youth group at 14 had not, in any way, prepared me for. She had become a woman. I want you to read that on the page. She had become a woman. She had been, the last time I saw her, a 14-year-old. She had been, in my own internal accounting, in the back of my mind for 5 years, the 14-year-old version of herself. The woman who walked into the restaurant in Los Angeles in 2008 was not a 14-year-old. The woman who walked into the restaurant was a 19-year-old in a city, in a body that had finished becoming itself, with a face I had not yet had a chance to memorize. I stood up. I want to put on the page that I stood up. I had been raised by my mother. My mother had been clear throughout my entire upbringing that a man stands up when a woman walks toward him at a restaurant. I had stood up for my mother. I had stood up for every woman in my family. I had not, in any of my college basketball life so far, had a moment where I was standing up for a young woman across a restaurant in Los Angeles. I stood up. She came to the table. She did not hug me. She did not kiss me. She did the thing 19-year-old women do when they have not yet decided what the dinner is. She put a hand on the back of the chair. She looked at me. She gave me, with her face, the small, small look that meant, I am here. The look did not, in any way, commit to anything else. I sat down. She sat down. The waiter came. We ordered. I want to tell you what we talked about. We talked about the youth group. We talked about Charlotte. We talked about her family. We talked about my family. We talked about the basketball. We talked about her acting. We talked about Los Angeles. We talked about the small set of things two 20-somethings who had known each other for one Sunday evening, 5 years earlier, in a youth group, would have to talk about on the night they had decided to find out whether the youth group had been the start of anything. The dinner was 3 hours long. I want you to read that on the page. The dinner was 3 hours long. By the end of the 3 hours, I had decided 3 things. The first thing, I had decided that the woman across the table was, in some quiet way, going to be the wife my mother had been telling me, since I was 8 years old, would eventually walk up the steps of our porch in Charlotte. The second thing, I had decided that I was not going to perform the deciding. I was, at 20, not yet ready to make the decision public, and I was not, in fact, going to make it public for several months. The third thing, I had decided that the rest of my life, in some quiet way, was going to be the work of building, on top of the youth group at 14 and the dinner at 20, a life that was going to be worth that woman's time. I have, in the 18 years since the dinner, been doing that work. The work has not, in any year, gotten old. Chapter 7, Ayesha, the first kiss in the driveway. I want to tell you about the first kiss, because the first kiss has, in the years since, become a small piece of the public version of our story, and the public version is, in this case, accurate. The first kiss was in the driveway of my parents' house in Charlotte. The driveway was a normal driveway. The driveway was the driveway my parents had pulled into every evening since the year my family had moved from Markham to Charlotte. The driveway was, on the night of the first kiss, in the early summer of 2008, after the dinner in Los Angeles by approximately 2 months, in the kind of Charlotte summer evening light that only Charlotte produces. I was home for a long weekend. I had flown from Los Angeles to Charlotte to see my family. I had also, in the small private way of a 19-year-old who had not yet told her parents about the dinner in Los Angeles, asked Stephen if he could drive over from Davidson to spend an evening with my family. He drove over from Davidson. He met my parents. He met my siblings. He met the small set of family friends who had, on that particular Saturday evening, been at the house. He sat at the kitchen table with my father. He sat in the living room with my mother. He stood in the kitchen with my brother. He had, for the duration of approximately 3 hours, the small private discipline of a young man who has been raised by his own mother, on the standard of being a young man who can walk into a Charlotte family living room and not, in any moment, embarrass anyone. He did not, in any moment, embarrass anyone. By the end of the evening, my mother and I were in the kitchen, doing the dishes. My father and Stephen were in the living room, having a small private conversation about basketball. The two conversations were, in the way of two parallel conversations in a single household, the small private opening rounds of two negotiations. The negotiations went well. He left around 10 in the evening. I walked him to his car. The car was in the driveway. The light in the driveway was on. The driveway was, at that hour, quiet. The neighbors had gone to bed. The cicadas had started up. The Charlotte summer had done the particular thing the Charlotte summer does at 10 in the evening, which is to settle, for a small interior moment, into the kind of warm calm that, by midnight, is going to be its full self. We stood by the car. He said, "Ayesha." I said, "Stephen." He said, "Can I?" I said, "Yes." He kissed me. I want to put that on the page. He kissed me. It was the first kiss. The first kiss was small. The first kiss was correct. The first kiss was in the driveway of my parents' house in Charlotte in the early summer of 2008 by a Charlotte boy I had known since I was 14, who had, in the 5 years since, become the young man I was going to marry. I did not know at the moment of the first kiss that I was going to marry him. I did know at the moment of the first kiss that he was the first boy in any room. The 5-year wait on my side of the wait was over. The first kiss took, by my own internal count, about 3 seconds. The driveway, at the end of the 3 seconds, was the driveway it had been before. The driveway, by the time the next chapter of my life had finished, was no longer just the driveway. The driveway was the place. The driveway was the small private spot in the entire city of Charlotte that he and I would, for the rest of our lives, hold between us. In the next chapter, the driveway was going to be the place he asked me to marry him. Chapter 8. Steph, going pro. I want to tell you what I did between the first kiss in the driveway in 2008 and the proposal in the same driveway in 2010, because the 2 years in between are, in some quiet way, the part of our love story that the public version has skipped. In those 2 years, I did 3 things. The first thing, I went pro. I declared for the NBA draft after my junior year at Davidson. I was drafted in the first round, 7th overall, by the Golden State Warriors in 2009. I want to put that fact on the page. The fact has been on the public record in many places for many years. I am putting it on the page in this love story because the fact is, in the love story, a piece of the chapter and not the chapter itself. The second thing, I moved to the Bay Area. I want to put that on the page also. I moved to the Bay Area. I had been a Charlotte boy my entire life. I'd been a Davidson student for 3 years. I had been, before either of those, an Akron-born child for the first 3 years of my own life. I had not, in any of those previous chapters, lived in the Bay Area. I had not, in any of those previous chapters, been more than a few miles from a particular kind of Southern Black American community in which I had, by 21, been raised. The Bay Area was a different country, by every reasonable measure, than the Charlotte I had grown up in. I rented an apartment. I bought my first piece of professional furniture. I went to my first NBA training camp. I started my first NBA season. I had, for the first time in my life, a paycheck whose size I had not, on any prior page of my life, fully imagined. The third thing, and this is the chapter, I called Ayesha every night. I want you to read that on the page. I called Ayesha every night. I had, by the time I had moved to the Bay Area, been dating Ayesha for about a year. The dating, until then, had been a long-distance dating. I had been at Davidson. She had been in Los Angeles. I had flown to Los Angeles to see her on weekends I had off. She had flown to Charlotte on weekends she had off when I had been there. The two of us had, in the year between the first kiss and the move to the Bay Area, learned to do the small private long-distance work that, in any other time period, would have killed the relationship. The phone calls had not killed the relationship. The phone calls had built it. I want to be specific about what the phone calls were. The phone calls were in the 2008 to 2010 era, just before the smartphone became universal, real phone calls. The phone calls were, in many cases, 2 hours long. The phone calls were, in many cases, the only time during the day I had heard her voice. The phone calls were the small private piece of architecture under everything else my life was, in those 2 years, becoming. I had a public name by then. I had a private name also. The private name was Stephen. Ayesha called me Stephen on every one of those phone calls. Ayesha calls me Stephen in 2026, in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the room where I am writing this chapter. Ayesha has, in 18 years of knowing me, called me Stephen. The country can have Steph. The country can have the jersey number 30. The country can have the 4 championships and the 2 MVPs and the Olympic gold and the Curry Center for the Performing Arts. Ayesha has Stephen. That is, in our marriage, the foundation. By the early summer of 2010, I had been dating Stephen, the boyfriend version of myself, with Ayesha for 2 years, and I had decided, in the small private way men decide things when they have, in fact, finished deciding, that the next thing I was going to do was ask her to marry me. I was going to ask her in the driveway. I was going to ask her in the driveway because the driveway was the place. The driveway, by the early summer of 2010, was already the place. The driveway had been, since the first kiss in 2008, the small private monument to where the relationship had started. I went to Charlotte. I went to her parents' house. I had, in my pocket, a small velvet box. I had, in my own internal posture, the small private discipline of a man who had been preparing, in real time, for the most consequential 5-minute conversation of his life so far. I asked her father first. I want to put that on the page because the chapter belongs to the next one. But the asking of the father is mine to record. I asked her father in the kitchen. He was at the table. He had a coffee. I had a coffee. I asked him directly. I told him I wanted to marry his daughter. I told him I had been preparing, in some small private way, to ask him for 2 years. I told him I would, if he said yes, do the work for the rest of my life. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Son." I said, "Sir." He said, "All right." I had, with that all right, the green light. The driveway came next. She will tell you that part. Part 3, the wedding. Chapter 9, Ayesha, the proposal in the driveway. I want to tell you about the proposal because the proposal is the small piece of my life I have been asked about in every interview I have given since 2010, and I have, in those interviews, given the press version. The press version is true. The press version is also small. The book version is the longer one. The proposal was in July of 2010. I want you to put July on the page. July is going to become the spine of this book. July in our family has, in the years since, become the only month most of our most important things have happened in. We were married in July. Riley was born in July. Ryan was born in July. Cannon was born in July. By the time the children started arriving, in 2012, the joke between us was that we had a July problem, and that we were not, on any reasonable level, going to be able to keep a calendar with any other month on it. In 2010, the July had not yet, in any deep way, started. The July of 2010 was the July of the proposal. I had flown home from Los Angeles, again, for a long weekend. He had driven down from the Bay Area for the weekend. I want to put on the page that in 2010, in our second year of long-distance dating, the small set of long weekends had become the small private rhythm of our relationship. We had, by 2010, become two adults who were, in some interior way, learning to do the work of marriage before we were married. We were at my parents' house. We had eaten dinner. We had said goodnight to my parents. We had walked outside. The driveway was the driveway. The Charlotte summer was doing the thing the Charlotte summer does at 10 in the evening, which is the same thing the Charlotte summer had been doing 2 years earlier, on the night of the first kiss. He had on a different shirt than he had had on the night of the first kiss. I had on a different dress. The driveway was the same. He stopped about halfway between the house and his car. He said, "Ayesha." I said, "Stephen." He said, "I want to do something. I want you to come over here." I came over. He got down on one knee. I want to put that on the page. He got down on one knee in the driveway, in the same spot we had had the first kiss, 2 years and approximately 3 weeks earlier. He had, in his hand, a small velvet box. He had on his face the small private expression I had only ever seen on him in private. The expression said, "The woman in front of me is the woman." He said, "Ayesha, will you marry me?" I said yes. I want to put on the page that I said yes immediately. I did not in any way pause. I did not in any way perform the answer. I did not in any way ask for time. I had been, in the small interior way, ready for the question for 5 years. I had been ready since the moment my mother had, on the phone in 2008, told me that she had always liked that one. I had been ready since the dinner in Los Angeles. I had been ready since the first kiss. I had, in the 2 years since, been doing the small private work of being ready in a more specific and more grown-up way. I said yes. He stood up. He kissed me. The kiss was the second kiss in the same driveway, 2 years after the first kiss. The kiss was, by my own internal accounting, the punctuation at the end of the chapter the first kiss had started. We went back inside the house. We told my parents. My mother cried. My father did not cry, in the way the men in my family do not cry on the day, but instead cry on the Sunday after, when the news has settled. My mother hugged us. My father hugged us. My siblings, who had been waiting upstairs because they had been told by my mother in advance what was about to happen in the driveway, came down the stairs. We told them. They cheered. We were engaged. The wedding was a year later. The wedding was on July the 30th, 2011. The wedding was at Central Church of God in Charlotte, the same church where we had 8 years earlier met in the youth group when I had been paying attention to the wrong boy in the room. The wedding was in the room that, at 14, I had not known I was already living the first chapter of. Chapter 10, Steph, July 30th, 2011. I want to tell you about the wedding day. I want to tell you because the wedding day was, in some quiet way, the most important Saturday of my entire life so far, and because the wedding day has, in the public record, been told in many small different versions, and I want to give my own version, in print, in this book, in this chapter. I woke up at 5 in the morning. I want you to put the time on the page. I woke up at 5. I had not slept much. I was in a hotel room in Charlotte. I had, in my own internal rhythm, the small private question of whether I was, at 23, in fact ready to marry a woman I had been waiting on, in some way, since I was 15. I lay on my back. I prayed. I want to be specific about what I prayed. I prayed in the way the men in my family pray, which is the way Black Christian men in the Curry household have been praying since I was a boy. I said, Lord, please give me the wisdom to be the husband Ayesha needs me to be. I said, Lord, please make me the father eventually that the children we have not yet had are going to need. I said, Lord, please let my mother see, on the porch of her own house in Charlotte today, the daughter-in-law she has been preparing me to bring her, for as long as I have been her son. I said, Lord, 3 more times. I got up. I went to the bathroom. I splashed water on my face. I put on the clothes I had laid out the night before. I went downstairs. I had breakfast with my brother Seth and with my father. My father was, on the morning of my wedding, a man who had been, in his own marriage, the model my own mother had pointed me at since I was a boy. My father did not, on the morning of my wedding, give me a long speech. My father did not, on the morning of my wedding, perform any of the small fatherly speeches that, in some other Black households, are the small private morning of speech a father gives a son. My father did, instead, the thing my father has done in every important moment of my life, which is to be in the room, present, with his eyes on my face, in a way that has, in my entire life, been the only fatherly architecture I have needed. He said, eventually, son. I said, Dad. He said, you are ready. I said, all right. He said, all right. I went to the church. The church was Central Church of God in Charlotte. The church was the same church Ayesha and I had met in 2003, in the youth group. The church was the same church our 2 families had been attending for many years. The church was the only church that, on the day of our wedding, made any sense to either of us. I want you to put on the page that we got married in the same room we had met in. I stood at the front. The pews filled up. There were 400 people by the official count. The 400 people were a particular Charlotte mix of the kind of people 2 large Charlotte families produce. NBA players, friends from Davidson, friends from Ayesha's high school, family friends from the youth group, family members from her side, family members from mine, my brother Seth, my sister Seidel, her brother Chad, her sisters Maria and Janice and Jazz, her mother Carol, her father John, my mother Sonia, my father Dell, and the small private discipline of a Charlotte church that had by then opened its doors several times for our 2 families and was, on July the 30th of 2011, opening them again. The doors opened. She came down the aisle. I want to give you, in the simplest possible language, what I saw. I saw the woman. I saw the woman who had, at 14, been across the youth group, paying attention to the wrong boy. I saw the woman who had, at 19, been in a Los Angeles studio apartment, in a t-shirt, on a couch, on a Tuesday afternoon. I saw the woman who had, in the driveway, in 2008, given me the first kiss. I saw the woman who had, in the same driveway, in 2010, said yes immediately, with no pause. I saw the woman my mother on the porch in Charlotte 12 years earlier, in the kitchen, had told me was going to walk up the steps one day. The woman walked down the aisle. The woman handed her flowers to her sister. The woman put her hand in mine. I held the hand. I have, in the 15 years since, held the hand most days. The hand has held back. The minister did the rest. The vows came around. We said them. The first dance, at the reception at the Ballantine Hotel, was to a song I am going to name in this book, because the song is on the public record. The song was Lucky by Jason Mraz and Colby Kayat. The song was, in 2011, a small, ordinary radio song. The song has, in the 15 years since, become a song that, every time it comes on a radio, in any car my wife or I have ever been in, has caused at least one of us, in the moment, to look at the other one. We have had, in 15 years of marriage, several thousand of those moments. That is the wedding. Chapter 11. Ayesha, Valentine Hotel. I want to give you the reception, because the reception is mine. The reception was at the Valentine, which is a Charlotte luxury hotel. The Valentine had, by 2011, hosted many weddings. The Valentine had not, before our wedding, hosted 400 guests for a wedding I personally had been planning in some small private way since I had said yes in the driveway a year earlier. I want you to picture the planning. The planning was a year long. The planning involved on most weeks several phone calls between me in Los Angeles and a wedding planner named Tiffany Ratliff in Charlotte. The planning involved, on every weekend I was home in Charlotte, several visits to florists, caterers, photographers, the venue, and the church. The planning involved, on most evenings, a small set of phone calls with my mother, who was, in her own way, the spiritual director of the entire production. I want to put on the page that my mother was, in the planning of the wedding, the head of the planning. I had a planner. I had a vision. I had a budget my fiancé had, with no argument, agreed to. The actual day-to-day work of how the wedding was going to look, sound, smell, and feel was, in the same way, the work of every day of my own life. Since I had been 6 years old, a piece of work I had been doing alongside my mother. The dress was strapless. The dress had a sweetheart neckline. The dress had a full skirt with intricate floral embellishment that, by my own count, had taken approximately 10,000 small individual pieces of beadwork to produce. The dress was the dress I had pictured at 14 in the youth group, which I had not, at 14, known I was picturing. The dress was the dress my body, in the late spring of 2011, had been waiting to put on. I put it on. I want to give you the moment in the room, before the wedding, when I was alone for 30 seconds. The bridesmaids had gone to take a final picture. My mother had gone downstairs for a small private conversation with the photographer. The wedding planner had gone to handle a small last-minute logistic. I was, by the way of the small lull, alone in the bridal suite for approximately 30 seconds. I went to the mirror. I looked at the woman in the dress. The woman in the dress had been, 8 years earlier, a 14-year-old in a youth group, paying attention to the wrong boy. The woman in the dress had been, 3 years earlier, a 19-year-old in a Los Angeles studio apartment, on a couch, in a t-shirt, in a Tuesday afternoon. The woman in the dress was, on July the 30th of 2011, the bride. I want to put on the page what I prayed. I prayed in the way Christian women in my family pray. I said, Lord, thank you. I said, Lord, be with him today. I said, Lord, be with the children we are going to have, who are not yet here, but who are, in some quiet way, already on their way. I said, Lord, make this marriage one you can use. I said, Amen. I said, Amen, the way the women in my family say Amen, which is the small, clean syllable that closes a prayer the way a door closes when the door has in fact been locked. The bridesmaids came back. My mother came back. The wedding planner came back. The procession started. I walked out of the bridal suite. I walked down the small set of stairs. I walked to my father, who was waiting by the doors of the sanctuary. My father took my arm. He said, "Baby." I said, "Daddy." He said, "You are ready." I said, "I am." He said, "I love you." I said, "I love you." The doors opened. I walked toward Stephen. The rest you have in the previous chapter already heard. What I will give you for the closing of this chapter is the first dance. The first dance was to Lucky. The dance floor was the dance floor of the Ballantine Ballroom. The light was the warm yellow light a wedding reception ballroom does at 9 in the evening on a July Saturday in Charlotte. The 400 guests were, by then, in the ballroom, in the rows of chairs along the perimeter. The DJ called us out. The first chords of the song came on. He took my hand. He took my waist. He started to move. We moved. We moved for the duration of the song. The song is, by Jason Mraz's standards, a short song. The song has the chorus that has, in the years since, been the small private refrain of our entire marriage. Lucky I'm in love with my best friend. Lucky to have been where I have been. Lucky to be coming home again. I have been, in the 15 years since, coming home again. I have been coming home to him. He has been coming home to me. The song has been right. The song has been right since 2011. The song has been right in every July since. Chapter 12, Steph, Lucky. I want to use this short chapter to say one thing about the song. The song was Ayesha's pick. I want to put that on the page first. I had not, before the wedding, been a particular fan of Jason Mraz. I had not, before the wedding, even known that Colby Kailat had been on the duet. I had not, before the wedding, been in the kind of musical territory that produced Lucky. Ayesha was. Ayesha had, by 2011, been a fan of the song for several years. Ayesha had played the song on several phone calls between Los Angeles and Davidson. When she had wanted me to hear a piece of music she had decided was, in some small private way, important. Ayesha had told me, once, in a phone call I have not, in 15 years, forgotten that she had decided, in advance of any wedding she was going to have to anybody, that Lucky was going to be the song the first dance was to. She told me at 20. I had, at 20, mentally agreed. By the wedding day, the song had been, in our internal rhythm, decided for several years. We danced to the song. I want to give you the small private thing that happened. On the dance floor, in the middle of the chorus, at the moment I, as the husband, in the suit, on the dance floor of the Ballantine, in front of 400 guests, with my mother in the second row of chairs and my father in the third, had the small private thought that ended up being the spine of the next 15 years. The thought was, this is the woman. I had been thinking versions of that thought since the dinner in Los Angeles in 2008. I had been thinking it in a small, private, growing way. I had been thinking it on every phone call. I had been thinking it on every long weekend. I'd been thinking it in the proposal in the driveway. I'd been thinking it on the morning of the wedding, in the hotel bathroom, with the water on my face, on the dance floor, with the song, with the guests, with her hand in mine, with her dress moving the way a dress with 10,000 pieces of beadwork moves at 9 in the evening. The thought was no longer a thought. The thought was the truth. This was the woman. This was the family. This was the rest of my life. I held on. I held on through the rest of the song. I have, in 15 years of marriage, kept holding on. The holding on is the marriage. The song has, every time it has come on a radio in any car my wife or I have ever been in since, reminded me. I have not, in 15 years, needed many reminders. I have, on a few hard nights, needed the song. The song has been there. That is the marriage. Part 4. The Family. Chapter 13. Ayesha. Riley. July 19th, 2012. She came in July. I want you to put July on the page. By the time Riley was born, on July 19th of 2012, it had been, by my own internal accounting, almost exactly a year since the wedding. A year. I had been, in that year, busy. I had been, in that year, building the small private architecture of a young marriage. I had been, in that year, driving the small set of routes between our first apartment in Walnut Creek and the various small set of cities Stephen's NBA schedule had taken us to. I had been, in that year, on small private sets in Los Angeles, on small private cooking experiments in our kitchen, on small private weekend trips back to Charlotte to see my mother. In November of 2011, 4 months after the wedding, I had taken a pregnancy test. The test was positive. I want you to put on the page what I did. I did not, the way some women do, hide the news for several weeks. I did not perform the news. I picked up the phone. I called Stephen. He was that afternoon in the Bay Area, between practices. I said, "Stephen." He said, "Ayesha." I said, "Sit down." He sat down. I said, "Baby." He said, "Baby." I said, "The test is positive." He said, "Hold on." He put the phone down. I heard the small sound of a chair being scraped. I heard the small sound of a young husband on the other end of the line, having a small private moment with the news in his own room. He came back to the phone. He said, "When?" I said, "The doctor will tell us. I would estimate July." He said, "July." I said, "July." He said, "Of course, July." We laughed. I want to put that on the page. We laughed. We had been married by then, in the 3rd week of July of 2011. We had now been told that our first child was going to arrive, by the doctor's estimate, in the 3rd week of July of 2012. We had not yet, at that point, fully developed the family understanding that the rest of our lives, in some small private way, was going to be a July problem. The Riley July was the start. She came on July 19th. I want to give you the small scene I have. The scene is the first time my husband held our daughter. We were in the hospital. The room was the room. The light was the light. He was on his face, the version of his face I had only ever seen on him 3 or 4 times in the entire 7 years I had known him. The version was the version I had seen in the driveway in 2008, when he had decided, in the small private way, that the kiss was about to happen. The version was the version I had seen at the front of the church on July 30th of 2011, when the doors had opened and I had walked toward him. The version was the version I had seen on the dance floor at the Ballantine, in the middle of Lucky. The version was the version of my husband I have, in 15 years of marriage, decided is the real one. He held her. He looked at her. He had her in the position I had not, in 7 years, seen him hold anything in. The position was the position of a father. He was, in that moment, in the version of himself a father is in. She blinked at him. He said, into the side of her face. Your mama and I have been waiting for you. Your mama and I are going to be the people who teach you how to be in the world. Your mama and I are not going to do it perfectly. Your mama and I are going to make some mistakes. Your mama and I are going to apologize when we make them. Your mama and I are going to keep doing it until we get it right. He said, into the side of her face, I love you. I have, in 15 years of being his wife, never seen him be more himself than I saw him be on that afternoon in July of 2012, with our oldest daughter on his chest, in the hospital room, with the curtains drawn, with no cameras, with no producer, with no podium. The version of him on that afternoon is the version I am still married to. The version of him on that afternoon is the version Riley, who is, at the time I am writing this chapter, 14 years old, and who has, in the years since, watched her father win 4 NBA championships and an Olympic gold medal, has decided is her father. The 4-time NBA champion version is the public version. The version with her in the hospital, on that afternoon in July of 2012, is the version Riley is going to remember. I am writing it down in this chapter so she will remember. Chapter 14, Steph, the championship years. I want to do a brief chapter on the championship years because the championship years are the part of my life the public version of me is, in some quarters, defined by, and because the championship years have, by every honest measure, been built on top of the marriage rather than instead of it. I want to be specific. The first championship was in 2015. I was 27. We had by then been married for almost 4 years. Riley was almost 3. The championship was a long Cleveland Cavaliers series. We won. The country knows the rest of the story. I want to give you what the night looked like inside the family. The night the Warriors won the 2015 NBA Finals, I came home to a house in the East Bay we had been renting. Riley was in her bed. Riley was 3. Riley had been by then watched on television by everyone in America after a famous post-game press conference earlier in the year, when she had, at the age of 2, climbed onto the podium with me and had taken, in some quiet way, the entire press conference. Ayesha was in the kitchen. Ayesha had on a t-shirt of mine, which she sometimes does. Ayesha had a glass of water in her hand. Ayesha was in the small private posture I have, in 15 years of marriage, learned to recognize as the posture of a wife who has been, on a long evening, doing the work the husband does not always see her doing. I came in. I put the bag down. I put the championship trophy I was going to be photographed with the next morning on the counter. I crossed the room. I put my arms around her. She put her head on my shoulder. She said, into the side of my neck, "Baby." I said, "Baby." She said, "You did it." I said, "I did." She said, "All right." I said, "All right." We stood there. The trophy on the counter did not in any way matter. The trophy was a very expensive piece of metal that had by then been in 100 photographs. The trophy was going to spend the rest of its life in a small set of public locations. The trophy was not the chapter. The chapter was the kitchen. The chapter was my wife on my shoulder. The chapter was the small private fact, which I have in 15 years held inside me, that the woman who had been on my shoulder on the night of the first championship was the same woman who had been on my shoulder on the morning of the day Riley was born, on the morning of the wedding, on the night of the proposal, on the night of the first kiss in the driveway, and on the Tuesday afternoon in 2008 in a Los Angeles restaurant, when she had, in a dress, walked across the room toward me for the first time as a grown adult. Same woman, same shoulder, same posture. The marriage is the architecture under all of it. The 2 more championships I would win in the next 3 years, and the 4th one I would win in 2022, and the Olympic gold I would win in Paris in 2024, and every other piece of the public version of my career are built on the same architecture. The architecture is the woman on the shoulder in the kitchen. She has been there every night. She is going to be there for the rest of my career and for the rest of my life. I want to give you, before this chapter ends, the small private rhythm of the next 3 championships, because the public version of those 3 championships is, in some quarters, the only version most readers know, and the small private version is the one that belongs in this love story. The 2017 championship was the second one. We won it in June of 2017. The night of the win, I came home to a different house than the 2015 house. The house was bigger. The kitchen was bigger. The light through the kitchen window was the same. Ayesha was in the kitchen. Ayesha had on a different t-shirt of mine. Ayesha had a glass of water in her hand. Ayesha did the same thing she had done in 2015. She put her head on my shoulder. She said, "Baby." She said, "You did it." I said, "We did it." She said, "All right." I said, "All right." The trophy was on the counter. The trophy did not in any way matter. The 2018 championship was the 3rd one. We won it in June of 2018. 2 weeks later, on July 2nd of 2018, our son Cannon was born. The summer of 2018 was, in the way of 2 adults building a family in public, the summer the public version of our marriage caught up to the private version. The private version had been, since 2011, the marriage. The public version had been, since 2014, the basketball. By 2018, the 2 had fused. The 2022 championship was the 4th one. We won it in June of 2022. Riley was almost 10. Ryan was almost 7. Cannon was almost 4. The night of the win, Ayesha and the 3 kids were at the arena. The kids were old enough by 2022 to understand what the trophy meant in the public version of my career. The kids were also old enough by 2022 to know that the trophy was not, in our house, the most important piece of furniture. The most important piece of furniture in our house has been, in 15 years of marriage, the kitchen counter. The kitchen counter is where Ayesha and I have, on most nights, said the small set of sentences a marriage gets built out of. The kitchen counter is where, on the morning we found out about Riley, the news arrived. The kitchen counter is where, on the afternoon Ayesha was told by the New York Times that her cookbook had made the bestseller list. She said, "You made it," and I said, "You made it." The kitchen counter is where, in 2019, she told me the brand had a name, and I said, "All right." The trophies are, in 2026, in the office. The kitchen counter is the marriage. That is the chapter. That is, in my own internal accounting, the only chapter that has ever mattered. Chapter 15. Ayesha. Ryan, July 10th, 2015. She came in July. I want you to put July on the page again. Ryan came on July 10th of 2015. The 2015 championship had been won by my husband and his team on June 16th of 2015. There had been, between the championship and Ryan, exactly 24 days. I want you to read that on the page. 24 days. The most public month in my husband's career was, in our family's interior life, also the most private month. The country, on June 16th, was watching the championship parade. Our house, on June 17th, was watching the calendar. I went into labor on July 10th. I was, by then, in the kind of late pregnancy Summer Bay area slowness that the public version of my life had not seen. I had not, in the last 6 weeks of the pregnancy, been on television. I had not been on a cookbook tour. I had not been in any restaurant other than my own kitchen. I had been with my husband, in our house, with Riley, who was almost 3, getting ready. Ryan came at the hospital in the Bay Area. The labor was, by my own internal accounting, easier than Riley's. The labor was, by every measure women in my family use, fast. The room was the room. The light was the light. The small interior fact of a second daughter in the same family 3 years after the first was, in some small private way, the answer to a prayer I had been praying since Riley was born. I had been praying for a second daughter. I want you to put that on the page. I had been praying for a second daughter. Riley had, from the start, been her own private universe, and I had, in the 3 years between the births, decided that what Riley needed, at some point in the next chapter of her life, was a sister. Ryan was the sister. Ryan came out making the kind of noise some babies make, which is a particular cry that, in the way of babies who are going to grow into themselves, was the announcement that she was going to be her own private universe also. We took her home. Riley met her. Riley, at almost 3, was old enough to have an opinion. Riley's opinion was that the new sister was, on Riley's calendar, a small private competitor. Riley walked over to the couch where Ryan was. Riley looked at Ryan. Riley looked at me. Riley said the only word she had decided was the right word in the moment, which was, in the way of an almost 3-year-old, mine. She said, mine. She did not, in the small private way, mean that the new sister was going to be Riley's possession. She meant instead that the new sister was, by the small private logic of an almost 3-year-old, a member of Riley's set. I said, yes, baby, yours. I said, the new baby is your sister. The new baby is Ryan. The new baby is going to be in your family for the rest of your life. The new baby is yours. Riley accepted that. Riley has, in the 11 years since, been Ryan's older sister. Ryan has been Riley's younger one. They have been, by every measure I have used in 15 years of being their mother, the two halves of an inseparable small family unit, with their own private language, with their own private jokes, with their own private opinions about everything. The two of them, eventually, would be joined by a brother named Cannon, and several years after that, by a brother named Caius. By the time Caius arrives, the architecture of the family is going to be the architecture of a family of 6. But that is several chapters away. This chapter is just Ryan, and the moment Riley said mine, and the moment I knew that the family was, in some quiet way, going to be all right. Chapter 16. Steph, the cookbook. I want to use this chapter to talk about my wife's career, because my wife's career is one of the small private things in our marriage that the public version, in some quarters, has not always understood. My wife has, in her own right, by every reasonable measure, built a small empire. The small empire is her own. The small empire is not built on top of mine. The small empire is, in some quiet way, alongside mine. The small empire is, in some other quiet way, the answer to a question my wife and I had been asking each other in the early years of our marriage, on the small set of long phone calls between Los Angeles and Davidson, and later, between Los Angeles and the Bay Area. Was she going to be a young woman whose own career was going to disappear into mine? Or was she going to be a young woman whose own career was, in some small private way, going to remain a thing of her own? The answer was the second one. The answer was the second one because Ayesha had, since she was about 6 years old in a kitchen in Markham, Ontario, been the kind of person who could not, by any reasonable measure, sit out of a room. The answer was the second one because the woman I had married was a woman whose mother had been in the same kitchen 25 years earlier, the kind of working mother who had taught her daughter that a woman's hands had to do their own work in a kitchen of their own. Ayesha started cooking. I want you to put on the page that the cooking, at the start, was not a career. The cooking was a small private hobby. The cooking was on Sunday afternoons in our kitchen in the Bay Area, in our first house, with Riley on the floor and the dog at her feet, the way Ayesha relaxed. The cooking became a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel became a Food Network show. The Food Network show became a cookbook. The cookbook became the New York Times bestseller list. I want to put on the page the day the New York Times bestseller list included her name. The day was a Tuesday. We were in the kitchen. The phone rang. She picked up. She listened. She said into the phone, "Hold on." She put the phone down. She put both her hands on the counter. She looked at me. She said, "Stephen." I said, She said, "The Times." I said, "The Times." She said, "The bestseller list." I said, "You made it." She said, "I made it." I want you to put on the page that I had not, in that moment, said anything about my own career. I had not, in that moment, said any of the small private things a husband in my position might have, by some interpretation, said. I had not, in that moment, made the moment about me. I had said, "You made it." She had made it. I have, in 15 years of marriage, learned that the small interior decision a husband makes, in a moment like that one, is the small interior decision that the rest of the marriage stands on. The decision is, the husband does not, on the day his wife makes the New York Times bestseller list, make the moment about him. The decision is, the husband says, "You made it," and the husband means it. The decision is, the husband, on the next morning, helps with the laundry the way he had been doing the laundry the night before, because the laundry has not changed, and the marriage has not changed, except for the small private way in which the wife, on this particular Tuesday, has, in some quiet way, become more. I have, in 15 years of marriage to my wife, watched her become more. I have, every single time, said the small private version of the same sentence. The sentence is, "You made it." I have meant it every time. I want to put on the page one more sentence about my wife's career, because the small private fact of being married to a woman whose career is, in some quiet way, exceeding her husband's expectations, is one of the most undersold privileges of a long marriage. Most husbands are not raised by their own fathers to expect their wife's career to be a thing that, in some moments, requires the husband to step back. My father did, in fact, raise me to expect that. My father did, in his own marriage, step back many times for my mother. My mother was the disciplinary architecture of our entire household. My father knew it. My father did not, in any moment, perform any of the small bruised male postures that some husbands of his generation performed when their wives' work was, on a particular weekend, more important than their own. I learned that posture from him. I have, in 15 years of marriage, used the posture I learned from my father in approximately 100 small private moments where the right move in the marriage was for me to step back and let my wife's work be the work that mattered that week. The cookbook tour was one of those weeks. The Sweet July launch was another. The Food Network premiere was another. The first store opening in Oakland was another. The magazine launch was another. I stepped back. I made dinners. I drove kids to school. I went to the practice. I came home. I did the laundry. I did, in some way, the small private architectural work of being the kind of husband whose wife is allowed to fly to New York, to Toronto, to Atlanta, to Los Angeles, for the week she is supposed to fly there, without anyone in the family worrying that the architecture at home is going to fall apart. The architecture has not, in 15 years, fallen apart. The architecture is, in 2026, the strongest piece of the marriage. That is the chapter. Chapter 17. Ayesha, Canon, July 2nd, 2018. He came in July. I want to put July on the page one more time. Canon was born on July 2nd of 2018. Canon was the third child. Canon was the first son. Canon was, by some private internal calculation our family had been making since Riley was born, the next piece of the family. I want to give you the conversation Stephen and I had before we had Canon in the kitchen of our house on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2017. He was at the counter. I was at the stove. Riley was almost 5. Ryan was 2. The dog was on the floor. He said, "Baby." I said, "Baby." He said, "Are we done?" I said, "With what?" He said, "With the family." I said, "No." He said, "No." I said, "I want one more." He said, "All right. I want you to put on the page that the conversation about whether to have a third child took, in our marriage, approximately 90 seconds. I had decided, in some quiet way, that I wanted a third child. I had not, before the conversation, told my husband I had decided. I told him in the conversation. He said, "All right." He said, "All right," because he had, in 6 years of marriage, learned that when his wife in the kitchen said she wanted a thing, the correct response from the husband at the counter was to say, "All right," and to do, in the rest of the day, the small private architectural work of making the thing happen. The thing happened. Canon was born 9 months and a few weeks later, on July 2nd of 2018. Canon was a boy. I want to give you the moment Stephen first held a son. The moment was, in some quiet way, the moment that closed a chapter of his own life he had not, before the moment, fully been able to close. Stephen had, by July 2nd of 2018, been the father of 2 daughters for 6 years. Stephen had, in those 6 years, been, by every measure I have used in 15 years of being his wife, an extraordinary father to those 2 daughters. Stephen had, in particular, been the father of a small public moment in 2015 when Riley, at 2, had taken over a post-game press conference and had become, in the public memory, the small private public face of the warmth in our family. Stephen had not, in those 6 years, held a son. He held Cannon. He had on his face the expression I had, by then, seen on him 3 times. I had seen it in 2012 with Riley. I had seen it in 2015 with Ryan. I had not seen the 3rd version of it until 2018 with Cannon. The version was the version of my husband that was, in some quiet interior way, the father of a son. He said, into the side of Cannon's face, "Son." He said, into the side of Cannon's face, "You came in July." He said, into the side of Cannon's face, "That is a good month to come in." He said, into the side of Cannon's face, "You are mine. I want you to put on the page that the my of you are mine was a different my than the my a father uses with a daughter. The my a father uses with a son is the small private syllable of a man who has, in some quiet way, been waiting his whole life to be the father of a boy who is going to grow up to be the same kind of man the man's own father had been to him. Stephen had been, since the morning of our wedding, the kind of father his own father had been to him. The boy in his arms in 2018 was the boy who was, eventually, going to receive that fatherhood directly. I want to give you, before this chapter ends, the small private scene from later that summer of 2018, because the scene tells you something about Stephen as a father that the public version of him, in some quarters, has not had the chance to fully see. The scene was a Sunday afternoon at our house. Riley was almost 6. Ryan was 3. Cannon was about 2 months old. Stephen was on the couch in the living room. Cannon was on his chest. Cannon was asleep. Stephen was watching Riley and Ryan play on the rug. Riley was, that afternoon, doing one of the small organizing the younger sister activities that Riley had been doing since Ryan was born. Riley had set up a small tea party on the rug. Riley was the host. Ryan was the guest. The dog was, in Riley's small private organizational logic, the 3rd guest. Stephen and I were, on the couch, the audience. Riley said, in the way of an almost 6-year-old who has decided to host a tea party, "Daddy, you want to come?" Stephen said, "Baby." "I have Cannon on my chest," Riley said. "Bring Cannon." Stephen, with the small private dignity of a 4-time NBA champion-elect, who is, in 2018, in fact, the father of 3 children under 6, got up off the couch with the 2-month-old on his chest, walked across the living room, sat down cross-legged on the rug between his almost 6-year-old daughter and his 3-year-old daughter, and accepted, with no irony, the small plastic teacup Riley handed him. He held the teacup. He had by then, in his other arm, the 2-month-old asleep against his chest. He had, on his face, the version of his face that the entire NBA post-game press corps had not, in 2018, ever been allowed to see. The version was the version of a black father in his living room on a Sunday afternoon, with 3 children around him, with no cameras, with no producer, with no microphone, with no podium, with no shot clock. The version was the marriage. That is the chapter. Chapter 18, Steph, the vow renewal. I want to use this chapter to tell you about the 10th anniversary. The 10th anniversary was on July 30th of 2021. We had by then been married for 10 years. We had by then 3 children. Riley was almost 9. Ryan was almost 6. Cannon was almost 3. I want to put on the page that, by the 10th anniversary, the small private fact of our marriage had become, in some quiet way, the spine of every other piece of work either of us was doing. I had, by the 10th anniversary, won 3 NBA championships and an MVP. Ayesha had, by the 10th anniversary, written 2 New York Times best-selling cookbooks, hosted multiple seasons of Food Network shows, opened restaurants, and started, in 2019, a lifestyle brand named Sweet July, which was named, of course, after the month I have already given you. We had in some way become the public couple a decade of marriage was supposed to make us. I had, on the inside, in the way of a husband at a 10th anniversary, decided that the right thing to do for my wife on the 10th anniversary was to do, on a small private day, at home, a vow renewal. I want to give you the day. The day was a Sunday. We were at our house. We had the day before taken the small set of family photos every social media active family takes on the morning of an anniversary. We had, the morning of the day itself, eaten breakfast as a family. The kids had been Riley, Ryan, and Cannon. The dog had been the dog. In the early afternoon, I had told Ayesha to put on a dress. She had by then learned that when I, the husband at the counter, told her, the wife at the stove, to put on a dress, the correct response was to put on the dress and to ask no follow-up questions. She put on the dress. I led her to the backyard. The backyard had been, by then, set up by a small set of people who had, in the previous 24 hours, done the small private work of making the backyard into the kind of backyard the renewal of a vow could be done in. There was a small arch. There were a small set of flowers. There was a small set of chairs. There was, at the front, a small officiant. The small officiant was Riley. I want to put on the page that the small officiant was our oldest daughter, who, at 9, had been told earlier in the week what her job was going to be, and who had, in the way of 9-year-olds, taken the job extremely seriously. Ayesha looked at Riley. Ayesha looked at the arch. Ayesha looked at the small set of family members in the chairs. Ayesha looked at me. She said, "Stephen." I said, "Ayesha." She said, "What?" I said, 10 years. She said, 10 years. I said, "I want to do it again." She said, "All right." We did it again. Riley said, with the small private dignity of a 9-year-old who has been given, by her own father, the responsibility of a small priest, the words she had been practicing for several days. Riley pronounced us in the way the wedding officiant in 2011 had pronounced us, husband and wife. Riley smiled. Riley, in some quiet way, made the renewal hers. I kissed my wife, Ayesha said, into the side of my neck. After the kiss, baby. I said, "Baby." She said, "You didn't have to." I said, "I had to." She said, "All right. That is the 10th anniversary. That is the marriage at the 10th year mark, in the backyard, with Riley as the officiant, with Ryan and Cannon in the front row of small chairs, with the dog at the dog's place, with the small private fact that the marriage had, by then, become the only piece of public-facing work either of us had been doing that was, in fact, fully ours. The other pieces of work, the championships, the cookbooks, the brand, the public lives, had been built by then. on top of the marriage. The marriage, at 10 years, was the foundation. The marriage, at 15 years, in the year I am writing this chapter, is still the foundation. Part 5. Staying. Chapter 19. Ayesha. Sweet July. I want to use this chapter to tell you about the brand. I want you to put July on the page one final time because the brand is named for July. And the brand is named for July because by 2019, when I started the brand, I had finally, in my own internal life, fully accepted that July was the month our family lived in. The brand is called Sweet July. The brand is, in 2026, several things at once. The brand is a flagship store in Oakland. The brand is a quarterly print magazine. The brand is a line of products in beauty, in home, in food. The brand is, in the way of any growing lifestyle brand, the small private project I have been, for 7 years, building. I want you to put on the page why the brand is called Sweet July. The brand is called Sweet July because in 2019, when I was sitting at my desk in the office, I had by then set up in our house, with a notebook in front of me, with a list of possible names for the brand I had been developing. I had the small private moment of clarity that any entrepreneur eventually has, in which the right name is, in fact, the only name. The right name was Sweet July. It was Sweet July because the wedding had been in July. It was Sweet July because Riley had been born in July. It was Sweet July because Ryan had been born in July. It was Sweet July because Cannon had been born in July. It was Sweet July because by 2019, I had been, in some quiet way, a woman whose family was lived inside one specific month of the year. I picked up the notebook. I wrote the word Sweet July at the top of the page. I underlined them twice. I went to the kitchen. I told my husband. He was at the counter. He was that afternoon slicing limes. I said, "Stephen." He said, I said, "The brand has a name." He said, "What is it?" I said, "Sweet July." He stopped slicing. He said, "Baby." I said, "What?" He said, "That is the only name." I said, "I know." He said, "When did it come?" I said, "In the office, just now." He said, "All right." He kissed me on the side of the head. He went back to the limes. That is the brand. That is the way the brand was named. That is, in some small private way, the way every important thing in our family has, in 15 years of marriage, been named. In a quiet kitchen, with the children somewhere else, with the dog at the door, with the husband slicing the limes the wrong way, and the wife, in the small private way, telling the husband the truth and asking him, with no preamble, to agree. He has every time agreed. That is the marriage. Chapter 20. Steph, the Olympic gold. I want to do a brief chapter on Paris in 2024. I won the Olympic gold medal in Paris in 2024. I had by then been in the NBA for 15 years. I had by then won 4 NBA championships. I had by then been on the cover of every basketball magazine. I had by then become, in some quarters, the most photographed shooter in the history of professional basketball. I had not, in any of those years, won an Olympic gold medal. The Olympic gold was the small remaining piece of the public version of my career that I had, in the years leading up to 2024, decided I wanted. I went to Paris. I want you to know that in the entire 2-week stretch of the Olympics, my wife and our oldest 3 children, Caius, had by then been alive for approximately 3 months and was at home with my mother and Charlotte. We're in the stadium. They were in the stadium for the gold medal game. They were in the stadium for every game I played. They had, by then, learned the small private work of being a basketball family travel unit, in the way of a family that has, by 2024, been, in some quiet way, the basketball family travel unit for 15 years. I want to give you the small scene from after the gold medal game. The scene was at the side of the court, after the medal ceremony, after the team photo, after the small set of media obligations. I had, by then, the medal around my neck. The medal was, by every reasonable measure, heavier than I had expected it to be. The medal was, in particular, heavier than the 4 NBA championship rings I had at home, in their case in our office. The medal was the medal. Ayesha came down from the stands. She had with her Riley and Ryan and Cannon. The kids were in the small set of Team USA gear my wife had, in the days before the game, ordered for them. The kids were excited. The kids had, in the way of an NBA family's kids, seen many of these moments before. Ayesha walked up to me. She put her hand on the medal. She said, "Baby." I said, "Baby." She said, "You did it." I said, "We did it." I want you to put on the page that I said we did it. I had, by 2024, in 15 years of marriage, learned that my wife had been part of every small private piece of training, every small private piece of focus, every small private piece of family management work that had let me be the kind of player who, at 36, was about to win an Olympic gold medal. The medal was, in some quiet way, hers as much as it was mine. I said, "We did it." She said, "All right." She kissed me. The kids hugged me. The medal, on my neck, did the small physical thing the medal does when somebody hugs the person wearing it. The medal moved. The medal is, in 2026, in our office. The medal is in a small case, on a shelf, with the 4 championship rings and the 2 MVP awards, and the small set of Davidson honors, and the various other public objects my career has produced. The medal does not, in any way, define our marriage. The marriage defined the medal. That is the order. That is the chapter. Chapter 21. Ayesha, Caius, May 11th, 2024. He came in May. I want to put on the page that he came in May. I want to put it on the page because, in our family, May was, until 2024, the month nothing had happened in. May had been a month I had, in 15 years of marriage, mostly skipped. The whole rhythm of our family's calendar had been built around July. July had been the wedding. July had been Riley. July had been Ryan. July had been Cannon. May had been, by every measure I had used, the month between Mother's Day and the start of the summer school break, with no other family event of any particular weight. Caius came in May. I want to give you the small private back and forth my husband and I had had in the autumn of 2023 about whether the family was, in fact, finished. We had been by then fairly confident that the family was finished. Cannon had been 5, Ryan had been 8, Riley had been 11. The 3 of them had, by every reasonable measure, been the family. We had not, in years, talked seriously about a 4th child. Then, in October of 2023, in the kitchen, on a Sunday afternoon, I said it. I said, "Baby." He said, "Baby." I said, "What about one more?" He stopped what he was doing. He said, "What about one more?" I said, "What about one more?" He said, "All right. I want you to put on the page that the conversation about the fourth child took, in our marriage, approximately 12 seconds. I had not, before the conversation, told my husband what I had been thinking. I had been thinking in the small private way of a 34-year-old woman in a stable marriage with a husband she has, by every measure, kept choosing, that the family had room for one more. He had, in 12 seconds, agreed. Caius was born in May of 2024. I want to give you briefly the small scene I have. The scene is in the hospital room, with Caius on my chest, on the afternoon of May 11th. The afternoon was a Saturday. The Bay Area light through the window was the kind of May light I had in 15 years of being a Bay Area mother, not previously had occasion to fully observe in a hospital room. The light was different. The light was greener, in some way, than the July light I was used to. My husband was in the chair next to the bed. The chair was the same model of chair he had been in for the previous 3 children's births. The hospital was the same hospital. The doctor was, in some cases, the same doctor. He was looking at Caius. He had on his face the version of his face I had, by then, seen on him 4 times. The 4th time was, in some quiet way, the most settled version of the 4. The 4th time was the version of a 40-something father who had, in the previous 15 years, fully figured out who he was, who his wife was, who the family was, and what their job, on the afternoon of a 4th child's first day on earth, was going to be. He said, into the side of Caius's face, "Son." He said, into the side of Caius's face, "You came in May." He said, into the side of Caius's face, "That is a different month than the rest of us came in." He said, into the side of Caius's face, "You are going to be your own thing in this family, the way every one of your siblings is their own thing in this family. You are going to be loved the same. You are going to be, in 2026, 2 years old. You are going to be, in a few more years, the youngest member of a family of 6. He said, into the side of Caius's face, "Welcome." I have, in 2026, watched my 4 children do the small private daily work of growing up in our house. They are, by every measure, doing it in a way that has, by my own internal accounting, exceeded what my mother in Markham, in the kitchen with the tape deck, had been preparing me to be able to give them. I am, in 2026, 37 years old. I am, in 2026, the mother of 4. I am, in 2026, the wife of 15 years to a man I have known, in some way, since I was 14 years old. I am, by every measure I know how to use, blessed. Chapter 22. Steph, the family of 6. I want to use this chapter to thank my family. I want to thank my 4 children. I want to thank Riley, who has been, since she was a small child, the small private organizing principle of our family's daily life, and who has, in the years since, become a young woman whose own life is, in 2026, on its way. I want to thank Ryan, who has been, since she was a small child, the small private warmth in the middle of every family room, and who has, in the years since, become the daughter who, on most mornings, is the first person in the kitchen and the first person to put a cup of coffee in front of her mother. I want to thank Cannon, who has been, since he was a small child, the small private son who watches, in the way of small private boys who are quiet for the first 8 years of their lives and who become, in some way, the most attentive observer in the family, what the family is doing. I want to thank Caius, who is, in 2026, 2 years old, and who is, in the small private way of 2-year-olds, the entire reset switch of a family that, before Caius, had thought it was finished. I want to thank my wife. I want to thank my wife. On the page, in print, in a chapter she will read. Ayesha, thank you. Thank you for the youth group at 14. Thank you for paying attention to the wrong boy at 14. Because the wrong paying attention let me, at 15, not yet be on your radar, which let me, at 20, send the Facebook message in 2008 with the small private hope that you might, finally, be willing to be on my radar. Thank you for the dinner in Los Angeles in 2008. Thank you for the first kiss in the driveway. Thank you for the yes in the same driveway, 2 years later, with no pause. Thank you for the wedding on July 30th, 2011, at the same church we had met in. Thank you for the dance to Lucky. Thank you for Riley in July of 2012. Thank you for Ryan in July of 2015. Thank you for Cannon in July of 2018. Thank you for the brand named Sweet July, which has, in the years since, made it possible for our daughter Riley to, in 2026, walk into her own school in Atherton and be, in some small private way, proud of her own mother in a way I had not, at 14 going on 15, in a Charlotte youth group, been able to predict that any wife I would ever have was going to make my children proud. Thank you for Caius in May of 2024. Thank you for the kitchen in 2026. Thank you for the t-shirt I am wearing, which one of our kids drew on, which I refuse to retire. Thank you for the small private fact that, in 2026, when our daughter Riley says, "Dad, you're slicing those wrong," my response is not the response I would have had in 2008 if anybody had told me that my future 14-year-old would, in our future kitchen, correct me with that level of comfort. The response is, in 2026, all right, show me. The response is, in 2026, the marriage. Thank you for 15 years. I love you. I will love you for as many more years as the Lord, through your continued forgiveness of my limitations, gives us. That is the chapter. Chapter 23. Ayesha, the brand. I want to use this chapter to give you briefly what I am still building. I am, in 2026, 37 years old. I am the mother of 4. I am the wife of 1. I am, by every reasonable measure, in the prime of a working life that, in many other women's stories, would have been, by then, fully built. It is not fully built. I want you to put that on the page. It is not fully built. The brand has, in 2026, several stores, several books, a magazine, and a small set of small private projects that are going to come out in the years between now and approximately 2035 in ways the public has not yet seen. I am, in 2026, just getting started. I want to be specific about what I mean. The first decade of my career between 2008 and 2018 was the decade of becoming a wife, becoming a mother, becoming a cookbook author, becoming a Food Network host. The second decade of my career between 2018 and 2028 has been, so far, the decade of building Sweet July into a real brand, of having Caius, of watching my husband win his 4th NBA championship and his Olympic gold, of being, in some quiet way, a small public Black and Caribbean Canadian American woman who has been, in 2018 onward, the matriarch of a family the country has watched with a particular kind of warmth. The 3rd decade of my career, between 2028 and 2038, is going to be the decade in which the brand fully matures. I want you to read what I just said. The 3rd decade. I am planning, in 2026, in this chapter of this book, in print, the 3rd decade of my career. I am planning it with my husband. I want you to put on the page that my husband is, in 2026, planning his own 3rd decade alongside mine. He has, by 2026, been quietly preparing the chapter of his life that comes after the basketball ends. The basketball is, by 2026, in its late chapter. The basketball is going to end, in some way, by approximately 2030. The chapter that comes after the basketball is going to be, in some quiet way, the chapter we have been preparing for since the day we got married. The chapter is, in 2026 beginning. I want you to put on the page that the chapter that comes after the basketball is, in our marriage, the chapter we are most excited about. Most marriages, by their 15-year mark, have, in some quiet way, given up on the small, private dream that the next decade is going to be more thrilling than the last one. We have not, in our marriage, given up on that dream. We are, in some quiet way, just getting to it. I am writing this chapter to put on the page that the rest of our marriage is, in 2026, the chapter we have been training for. The next decade is going to be different than the last one. The next decade is going to involve, in some way, less basketball, less acting, less Food Network, less Sweet July magazine, and more of whatever the next thing is. The next thing is not yet, in 2026, fully named. I will, in some way, name it eventually. I will, in the way I have named every important thing in this family, name it in the kitchen, with my husband at the counter, with the children somewhere else, with the dog at the door, with the husband slicing the limes the wrong way. He will, in the way he has every other time, agree. That will be the next chapter. Chapter 24, Steph, the Long Marriage. I want to use the last chapter of the book to say one sentence, and one sentence only. A long marriage is the only luxury I have ever cared about. I have, in 15 years of NBA-level paychecks, been able to buy most of what a man can buy. I have been to the rooms. I have been on the boats. I have been in the front seats. I have signed the deals. I have done the things a Charlotte boy whose father played basketball and whose mother insisted in the kitchen on God's school family basketball in that order could not, at 6 years old, in our living room in Charlotte, have predicted he would be allowed to one day get to do. None of those things have, in the end, mattered the way I expected them to matter. The thing that has mattered, the thing that has held its weight, the thing that has, on the Tuesday of any given week, in any given year, in any given decade since 2011, been the thing in the room I would not have traded, is the long marriage. I want to give you the sentence one more time, in plain language, in this chapter, in print. A long marriage with my wife is the only thing I have ever wanted that has, in the having of it, been more than I expected. I have, in 2026, 16 days before our 15th anniversary on July 30th, in a kitchen in Atherton, with 4 children in the house, with a dog at the door, with the smell of garlic and butter on a Sunday afternoon, with the small private fact that the woman at the stove is the same woman who, at 14, in a youth group in Charlotte, was paying attention to a different boy, what most men do not in their entire lives get to have. I have her. I have us. I have, in the architecture under everything else I have built, the marriage. The marriage is, in my own internal accounting, the only thing that has ever mattered. I will, for the rest of my life, keep choosing it. She will, for the rest of her life, keep choosing me. We have in the kitchen 4 small witnesses to that choosing, who are, in the years to come, going to take the small private architecture out into their own marriages. The architecture is going to keep building. That is the long marriage. That is, in our family, the inheritance. Epilogue. Both of us. A house. An evening in 2026. We are back in the kitchen. He is at the counter. I am at the stove. The dog is at the door. The 4 kids are doing what 4 kids do. He says, baby. I say, He says, dinner. I say, give me 5. He says, you said 5 10 minutes ago. I laugh. The kids who are in the room laugh. The dog, in some way, also laughs. Caius, in the high chair, slaps the tray. I come around the counter. I put my chin on his shoulder. I look at the limes. I say, those are sliced wrong. Riley at the island looks up. She says, told you, Dad. He laughs. He says, all right, show me. I show him. This is the same scene I described in the prologue. I want you to read it again with what you now know. The kitchen is the same. The counter is the same. The man is the same. The woman is the same. The 4 kids are the same. The dog is the same. The limes are the same. What has changed between the prologue and the epilogue is what you, the reader, are now bringing to the scene. You now know about the youth group at 14. You now know about the Facebook message at 20. You now know about the first kiss in the driveway. You now know about the proposal in the same driveway. You now know about the wedding on July 30th, 2011. You now know about the song. You now know about Riley, Ryan, Cannon, and Caius. You now know about the brand. You now know about the championships. You now know about the medal. You now know about all of it. The scene has not changed. The reader has changed. That is the only thing this book has been trying to do. We will be in this kitchen, in some house, every evening, for as many evenings as the Lord gives us. The 5 becomes 10. The 10 becomes 100. The 100 becomes, in the long run, the only number that has ever mattered. Choose each other, even on Tuesday, especially on Tuesday, especially in July. That is the marriage. That is, in our family, the prayer. I want to give you, before this book closes, one more small private scene. The scene is on a different evening. The scene is the evening of July 30th, 2026. The scene is our 15th wedding anniversary. We did not, on the 15th anniversary, have a vow renewal. We had had one for the 10th, and Riley had been the small officiant, and the photograph from that afternoon is, in 2026, on the wall in the kitchen of our house. The 15th anniversary did not need its own ceremony. The 15th anniversary was, in some quiet way, an anniversary that wanted to be in the kitchen. We were in the kitchen. The 4 kids had been put down, in the various ways their various ages required. Riley was in her room, on her phone, in the way of a 14-year-old. Ryan was asleep with the dog. Cannon was asleep in the room he shares, on his good days, with his older brother Caius's stuffed bear. Caius was asleep in the high chair, which we had carried, after dinner, into the corner of the kitchen because he had refused that night to be moved. It was approximately 10 in the evening. The kitchen had been cleaned. The dishwasher was running. The light over the stove was the only light on. Stephen was at the counter. I was at the counter. We were both, in the way of 2 adults at the end of a long anniversary day, in t-shirts. He said, "Baby." I said, "Baby." He said, 15 years. I said, 15 years. He said, "The kitchen has been the marriage." I said, "The kitchen has been the marriage." He said, "What do you want for the next 15? I said, "More of the same kitchen." He said, "All right." He kissed my forehead. He turned off the light. We went upstairs. That is the marriage. That is the love story. That is, in our family, the only chapter we have ever needed. A note for the reader who is, in some kitchen of your own, on some Tuesday of your own, in some marriage of your own, reading this book at the end of your own long day. We are not, in any way, the model. We are one model among many. The Black American husband from Charlotte and the Caribbean Canadian wife from Markham have, in 15 years, built one specific kitchen, in one specific city, in one specific country, in one specific decade. Your kitchen is going to look different. Your husband is going to slice your limes a different wrong way. Your wife is going to name a brand a different month than the month we named ours. Your children are going to come, if they come, on different days than ours did. Your trophies are going to be different trophies. Your medal, if you have one, is going to be a different medal. The kitchen is the same. The kitchen is the marriage. The marriage is the architecture. Choose each other. Even on Tuesday, especially on Tuesday, especially in July. That is the prayer. That is, on the last page of this book, the only sentence we have ever needed to say to each other, and to our 4 children, and to the rest of you who have, by reading the book, joined the kitchen for the duration of these 2 hours. A final word. This book is inspired by publicly available material about Ayesha Disa, Alexander Curry, and Wardle Stephen Curry II. The exterior of their lives, the meeting at Central Church of God in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2003, the Facebook reconnection in 2008, the first kiss in the driveway of Ayesha's parents' house in Charlotte in 2008, the proposal in the same driveway in July 2010, the wedding on July 30th, 2011, the births of Riley Elizabeth Curry on July 19th, 2012, Ryan Carson Curry on July 10th, 2015, Canon W. Jack Curry on July 2nd, 2018, and Caius Curry on May 11th, 2024, the 4 NBA championships, the 2 MVP awards, the Olympic gold in Paris in August 2024, Ayesha's New York Times best-selling cookbooks, The Seasoned Life, 2016, and The Full Plate, 2020. Her Food Network series, Ayesha's Homemade, 2016, her Sweet July brand and quarterly magazine, her Bay Area restaurants, the family's Curry Knowles 2021 vow renewal, officiated by their oldest daughter, Riley, and 15 years of public family life, is sourced from on-record interviews, the principal's own books and platforms, public press, and Ayesha and Stephen's own social media and joint family content. The interior of this book, the youth group on a Sunday evening in 2003, the Tuesday afternoon Ayesha received the Facebook message in her Los Angeles studio apartment, the kitchen of the Bay Area house on the Tuesday afternoon Ayesha was told by the New York Times, the locker room and kitchen on the night of the 2015 championship, the backyard of their Atherton house on July 30th, 2021 with Riley as officiant, and the kitchen in 2026 has been dramatized in the spirit of what they have said in their own words. No third party has been named. Where the public record was silent, the narrative has been softened, omitted, or generalized. To Ayesha and to Stephen, you have given the rest of us, on purpose and over 15 years, the rare gift of a marriage that has been willing to be witnessed in public and lived in private. Thank you. To Riley, Ryan, Cannon, and Caius, you came in July, and in May. The architecture is yours. To the listener, thank you for the 2 hours. I'm Barron Darby, so love boldly, love deeply, and never stop living your story.